Hi, I'm Matt Barry, and this is Low Budget Visions, where we celebrate personal, DIY, independent filmmaking. And I'm joined tonight by uh, Walter Smits, filmmaker. Walter, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
I wanted to ask, just to kind of get started, if you could tell us a little bit about how you started making films, how you got involved with filmmaking.
Yeah, totally. I'd say I think I always like to think about my roots being in like my home videos when I was a kid, which I think inform a lot of like what I do and how I work. Um, Nowadays, after revisiting them in my 20s, but yeah, just having a home video camera and playing around with my brother and sister and whatever toys that we had. Obviously, I think like really set the stage for that. And then for a lot of my like a lot of what I chase, which we'll talk about later, like Playground Absurdism and stuff, like I think comes from the realization that um when I was doing this, I wanted to be like a director, but I didn't know directors, I didn't look up directors, I didn't watch behind the scenes videos. So I was sort of performing this idea of what it meant to be a director um in a very like kid like kind of way, filling these shoes that I didn't fit in or know anything about. And yeah, so that's really what got me excited about it, is that like the playfulness of making a movie outside of the realm of anything else. And then I just decided to go to film school after kind of being pressured to go to college. And so I decided to do film school just to like make people happy. And that kind of just furthered me in the direction of filmmaking.
Well, it's that idea of playground absurdism that really drew me to your work, and the idea that I also heard you refer to as anti-film,
Mm.
which I think you were, in using that term, you were sort of referring to the same types of projects, these feature-length films that, in a lot of ways, almost deconstruct what it means to make a feature, I think.
Yeah,
In terms, and we can get into all of that in more detail later. But I just wanted to mention that I think it's that idea of playground absurdism that really, drew me to your work. And as I've checked out your feature-length films that you have available on your website, uh, there's so much to get into. I mean, there's so many interesting things that you're doing with the form, the concept of time, of what it means to make a feature, and something that you just said about um, almost performing the role of a director, I think is how you put it. Just the act of directing itself and how that becomes I mean, it is a kind of performance. And I think that as with a lot of things like that, there are certain, expectations that come into place, especially through film school. And, when you read about the, quote unquote, correct way of doing things as a filmmaker. And what it sounds like you have uh, arrived at very, very quickly here is how to challenge those expectations through your work and almost by tackling them head on and kind of bringing them to the forefront, which I find really interesting. It's something that's taken me. I think one of the reasons I connected so strongly with your work and your ideas specifically is because I feel like it's a kind of a similar path that I've arrived to. Although I think it's taken me much longer in my case than you. It seems like you had a very clear um, vision from fairly early on. Would you say that's accurate as far as in terms of your filmmaking?
I also think that it took me a while to sort of like arrive at it. And um I'm really interested to check out your work too. I should have asked ahead of time to check it out so we could have talked about that as well. But I yeah, I feel like the sort of like the new idea of what I've been doing, I think, especially with like the playground absurdism, is something I started chasing in. I was just thinking the other day of when it was. It was like 2018 or 2019. And it's sort of yeah, it definitely took me a while. I guess it didn't take me a while to figure out, because I was sort of you know chasing after this thing in sort of a silly way, because I was really frustrated with like myself not being able to gather the crew together that everybody else that maybe I went to like film school with, or that there's these other like indie filmmakers and stuff who I'm watching, and it's just like, where do they have the money? Where do they find the people? And how do these people have the time to do that? And how do people have like the like sometimes I sort of feel like it's a lack of respect to like take advantage of people in a certain way to like have them involved in your project, which I think that's like a very like large scale um of what that means and where different people fall on that. But for me, it's really hard to like rope people into something that isn't like fun, you know, or is like yeah. So, anyways, that sort of like that sort of stuff with my personality was sort of informing this like frustration that I was having, and then also watching people who were getting like $10,000 grants, or they were raising like $50,000, and then they just made something that like with the given intention that I was aware of sort of turned out to be crap. I guess, you know, to put it bluntly or unpoetically, but yeah, and so I was really frustrated with that. And so that kind of combination of things where it's just like I like hanging out with my friends, I like finding something for us to do that's like a game. And then I also am sort of like frustrated. So I just want to do it because it's like, you know what? I'm seeing these people have tens of thousands of dollars. Why don't I get $20 and just like go shoot a movie in one day and buy my friends some pizza or something? And um, so that's sort of like where it came out of. And I think a lot of the like form of it is very, which is kind of how I arrived to like the absurdism part of it, and the playground absurdism part of it is because it is a lot of it is very meaningless, and it's really the movie itself isn't supposed to like evoke anything. It's a lot more about the playfulness of it and the that aspect. So, but to circle back, sorry, I think I sort of spun out of control there, but I think the um yeah, I feel like I'm always like trying to figure it out, and so it's very validating to hear you say that. It seems like I arrived at it quickly, but I do feel like it's kind of taken me a while, especially compared to some of the people that I'm looking at. So it's hard to say, and it's all throwing paint at the wall at the end of the day.
Yeah, it is an ongoing process of excuse me, of discovery, experimentation, and I think also kind of pushing yourself and allowing yourself to take things in more, kind of extreme, farther directions than you might have ever thought before. It's almost like with each, I mean, I'm kind of speaking from my own perspective here, I guess, but, I find like with each project, I am willing to take some new risk or, go in some direction, do something differently. I mean, one of the things I find really interesting about your films is the use, is how you bring the filmmaking process into the movie, giving the actors directions from off camera or whatever. And I think that's something that opens up a whole world of fun, as you put it, because when you can bring the audience into the filmmaking process like that, it's in a way, of course, there's like a distance, or I guess like a distancing effect because you're aware of the fact that you're watching a movie being made, but at the same time, it's fun for the audience because they feel like they're taking part in it and seeing all those little moments in between that normally end up on the cutting room floor. I wanted to get back to one thing that you mentioned about your time in film school, and I I apologize if I'm maybe conflating some of the comments that I heard you'd made on the experimental film podcast a while back. So if I refer to something from that, just bear with me here. I was drawing on your discussion about your time in film school, and I almost that sense of frustration at seeing other people make films. And I think something you said in the podcast interview was that you felt like there was this expectation. Everybody wanted to make a feature, and it was very much in the air. And this thing everybody had to do it. And I think from what I recall, your attitude was, okay, fine, I'll make a feature. I'll fill 70 minutes or whatever. But it's how you do it that I think really sets your work apart. And I agree with you that there is something kind of frustrating as a filmmaker, especially I think when you're younger, especially if you're in film school and in one way you're on equal footing with all of your peers in terms of like your experience level.
Hmm.
But I think sometimes people can have very different levels of access to resources, financing, people, sometimes just friends who are willing to help out. And so, yeah, it can become very frustrating when you feel like you got all these ideas that you want to do and you see other people who are able to do it. And I think that's where a lot of people probably get discouraged and give up. But it sounds like what you've done is to go from that and to find a way to do it. And out of that has exploded this really creative process, I think. I mean, these really interesting films. Anyway, that was more of I think a statement than a question. But I guess just do you agree that there was, I mean, did you find that the frustration effectively became a motivator for you?
Oh yeah, entirely. I mean, I was it was like purely born out of that frustration of like, um, like you said, the all these people throwing around the word feature, like it's just like what you had to do, and I was feeling kind of frustrated. Like as someone who really like cares about being creative, and not to say that these other people didn't care about it, but it's like there's sort of this idea of um like how to capitalize on that all the time,
Oh yeah.
and how to make money off of it. And it's like for some reason it's like you got to prove that you can make a feature to do it, when to me it's like by making little short films and stuff all the time that just like mean nothing. It's like that's where I was feeling like I was growing. And so it was also just kind of that frustration of like come on, like I feel like these people are just like wasting their time. And I think that's all sort of rooted in a little bit of like um I guess the like sort of capitalist Hollywood mentality where it's just rooted in like millions and millions of dollars. And um I sort of forgot what I was saying here, but the frustration was very prominent, and feeling, I think at the same time I was also feeling this frustration with like a lack of identity that I had, which is something that I think about a lot now, because it was around the time that I started making these films where I started feeling really confident in myself, and um, being more comfortable with my queerness, and eventually coming to being more comfortable with my gender identity, and stuff like that. And so at the time, I was just really frustrated, and I felt so boxed in by myself, ultimately by my social anxiety. And so it was like, yeah, I used the that frustration a little bit as like I pretended I was like competing against people who weren't even paying attention to me, um and sort of sarcastically too, because it's like my friends and I, when we would do this, we'd have like a viewing party afterwards where it was like a fake red carpet, and our friends would come in and be a dirty sheet, and we'd be giving everyone Pokemon cards as their tickets and stuff. And I created like a character called Dick Chedman, who was like a movie critic who hated my films. And like um and so it was this whole like that's kind of where the performance started, because it was like really fun to like do that. And it really gave me like as a person this sort of like identity that really made a lot of sense, because I am very goofy, and for whatever reason, I just like I can't think about things in the technical way of like perfecting how to use a camera and perfecting a shot and stuff like that, in the same way that people could just like mimic these things that were happening in music videos, and the people who can just like keep up with trends so that they can get the commercial work and stuff. And that kind of stuff, just my brain just does not work that way. So which in some ways I think it's like a blessing too, because I really get to enjoy myself with filmmaking, instead of like trying super hard to um be a filmmaker by like shooting commercials all the time or something, which I think is great. But it's just like I know it really drains a lot of people, and I have some friends in like LA and New York and Chicago who just kind of hate what they're doing because they were a little confused going into it. But also, they have good health insurance and stuff. So
Yeah, it's always the struggle, I guess, is picking between the commercial realities of trying to make it in the film business or the industry, whatever that means to different people, and then maintaining that sense of fun and enjoyment that I think have really managed to do with your work. At least it certainly comes through when I watch it. I'm curious though, kind of going back to the idea of the commercial aspects of filmmaking. Do you find, and maybe thinking about, whether it was some of your peers in film school or just how you felt at the time, did you feel like the commercial expectations were so strong that if you didn't share them, there was almost a sense of, oh, well, what do I do? What am I going to do? I mean, it was something I personally used to feel, is that there was a really strong expectation of, making it professionally in film. And I think that, anyway, I'd be curious to hear a little bit about how you continued to pursue that sense of play and fun with it, as maybe some of your peers were going off in the commercial direction.
Hmm. Um, yeah, I definitely felt like um, I should have been doing like more commercial stuff. I think a little bit further down the line, but after I'd graduated from film school and I moved to Minneapolis, it was kind of this funny experience that was just, it felt like a big sign to me. But I met up with someone who's like owns a video editing company in town, and because he was like a friend of a friend or something, and so I was just like, hey, how's it going? And I was like, so what's the like what should I be doing? What do you think I should be doing to like get involved in the film scene or something? And he was like, all you need to do is write a script, a really good script, shoot it, write another really good script, make it even better, get into a couple of film festivals, and then move out to LA. And I was just like, what kind of advice is that? Like I'm sort of asking like how you enjoy making, because I was like, well, what are you doing here then?
Right.
Like why is that your advice if you're not doing that? And anyways, I felt like he had that kind of maybe envy for the people who got out of town because whatever reason. But um yeah, I did feel a lot of pressure to be commercial that way, especially, and even I mean in film school definitely, but like getting out of film school, the first like 3 years I really felt like I needed to like be getting out and about, and I was doing a lot of like music videos, so I was trying to like go to music shows and like meet people, which I'm not good at. And eventually I was like making some videos for a coffee shop in town and trying to do stuff like that, just so I could like go to like Christmas, and be like, yeah, I'm working really hard and I'm really busy and it doesn't pay well, but at least I'm busy. Um, and that was ultimately like really draining. Um, so yeah, it's kind of funny how the worlds are so blended together between like the deep art world and the deep like commercial world. And you're always kind of up against both forces because sometimes you're also worried about like, am I being too commercial or too Hollywood forward with my work or something? And I don't know. Anyways, I think, did I answer your question?
You did, yes, thanks. It's really it really does interest me, thinking about this, because of how these paths to success, like you said, you were asking for advice, right? And the
Mm,
advice that you get, it may have been generally true, whatever, 10, 20 years ago, whatever. But, I think things can change so quickly that advice like that can become very quickly outdated. And
mm,
again, I'm just thinking back to my own experience. I kind of going through similar things where I sort of thought that the path of making making films would look something like, what I had kind of grown up with in the 90s, hearing about like Kevin Smith, for example, the idea of making a film that would get into a festival, and one thing would lead to the other, it would build on that. And I very quickly realized that, it just doesn't work that way anymore.
yeah.
Whatever it was, 10, 15 years out, whatever, I realized, like, things just change so quickly, and those paths to success, that worked for one person years ago, it's just it is a process of discovery. I think no matter which direction you're going in this in filmmaking. But so it's interesting to hear that you encountered that as well. And um, so it was around. So I want to ask one other thing about you kind of coming out of film school
Hmm.
moment with the short films that you were making. And we can get into those as well. I do want to ask you a little bit about that, but just generally with the short films, did you find short films creatively satisfying, or did you find that you wanted to make try making features, even if they didn't look like everybody else's commercial feature films? I mean, what was your relationship with short films at that point in your career?
Yeah, I love short films. I always really like short films, especially making them because um it feels much more like a poem compared to a novel, where that you just kind of get to like put out these like feelings that people get to um process a little differently than when you're processing a whole chunk of time in different ways, especially because I used to, and I mean I still do, I just like love movies in general. So um making a short film, well, like at the 2016, my favorite movie was like Moonlight, and making a short film felt so different than that. But it was always a lot more satisfying to me, just because there is like such a poetry to having a short amount of time, and especially when it's like what I really started realizing at a certain point was just like chasing after like mining feelings, instead of like crafting a story or crafting, a narrative, or having a compelling character. And finding, I feel like I still like characters and stuff. And I sometimes in some of my short films, they're a little more interesting than in others, but there's always like a character in my films. I have a hard time not having a character. But yeah, so I really love short films as a medium, and I always, one thing that I say is I like to joke that my feature films are just short films disguised as feature films, because I think conceptually, and as far as like the content is concerned, it's a short film's worth of ideas that need time to like kind of boil a little bit and steep. But ultimately, it's just that same sort of mentality stretched out.
It's interesting to hear you say that because I had a kind of similar thought actually as I was watching your short films after having looked at some of a couple of the features, and it struck me that what you're doing with the shorts in many ways, the features very much are like an expanded version of that, where I think you're playing with, at least in terms of the some of the elements that you're working with. I do feel like the features, I see like a strong relationship there in what you're doing with both formats, at least among the ones I watched. And it's also interesting to hear you talk about the poetry of short films, because that was really the word that flashed through my mind as I watched the shorts, was that there is a real poetic quality to them, especially through the voiceover and the sense of the personal that you bring into it. I mean, these aren't, again, at least the ones I watched, these aren't traditional narrative shorts, which I think also puts them in an interesting opposition to the typical film school short, which is usually, or at least was, used as an industry calling card.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
again, I think it's interesting how even that format, which has its own commercial expectations, is open to be explored and played with, just like you do with a feature film.
Hmm.
Let me actually, while we're on the subject of the shorts, I do want to bring up. I'm going to just read from your website quickly about this idea of the digital diary film, and under your description of that, you say the digital diary film explores what it means to have human feelings in a digital world. The empty and droning AI generated narrators act as vessels to explore love and loss and joy in the modern era. and you mentioned that you use the analog camcorder with intense post-processing to create footage that feels like a ghostly memory of the present. I thought that was an interesting description of it. Do you find that you're interested in is memory something that comes up for you a lot in your work?
Yeah, yeah, a lot. For the reasons of, I think like the basic nostalgia of it, I think is just fun to explore, and it's so like beautiful to be able to work in a medium that is like so rooted in memory. And it's like how it is such a like strong visceral way of like capturing memory and time and everything. And so I like memory a lot for that reason. But I lived with my grandma in high school through like my early 20s, and she had Alzheimer's, and so I spent a lot of time like helping her and taking care of her and like witnessing the memory and the loops and all of that. And so the importance and the um yeah, I guess just the importance of memory became really strong for me, because I think there's a little bit of like fear um in losing that, and also sort of a beauty in the fleeting nature of it, like regardless of how your brain is. um and yeah, so memory plays a big part in a lot of stuff, and so that's kind of how I came into like the digital diary film, which I just called that because it feels a little bit unfair to the medium to call it a diary film, just because it is kind of futuristic, um compared to like a Jonas Mekas thing or something. But yeah, the memory, and so with this like the newer films that I've been doing, it's especially rooted in memory, because usually, especially the like digital diary films, are usually based in like one tape's worth of like footage that I collected over a span of time, or just like a trip. Sometimes it'll be like a whole year on a camera, or sometimes it's just like a weekend that I took a drive somewhere or something. And but it's all about memory, and it's all about capturing the like thing that sort of made the trip special, or the thing that I was fixated on. And but yeah, I can't really escape memory, in the same way that everybody can escape it, but I'm always considering it. And right now I'm like thinking about like like literally as we're talking, my brain keeps going over the thing where it's just like memory is so funny, because the more you think about something, the more false it is, and the more you remember, the more false the memory is, because you add in your little things. So it's interesting to like approach filmmaking from that lens, and which is sort of like what I normally do in the memory of my grandma, I think.
I'm curious with this idea of memory and filmmaking. It's actually something I've been thinking about myself recently. Do you find that do you feel that filmmaking preserves memories, more vividly, more clearly than in your mind, or do you find that there's a detachment because of the technology, and that you can look at it and say, yes, I know this is a video, I objectively know this is a video recording of this or that day or this or that event, but in some ways, perhaps it's not as strong or evocative as it is in your mind. Do you have any, do you see any kind of difference between that? And I guess my kind of follow up to that would be to think about, uh, do you feel that film is an objective or accurate right way of recording a memory, or do you feel that your vision as a filmmaker will inevitably skew how it's recorded?
um that's a great question. I think it kind of depends, obviously, because there's there's the movie Afterlife. Do you know that one by now I can't think of the director's name. I'd have to anyways, the concept of the film is it's like these people go to this sort of purgatory of sorts where they have to pick one memory that they take with them forever. And then the people who work at this facility recreate the memory, and then they go on to the next part of like the afterlife or whatever. Um, and I kind of think about that with your question a little bit because it's sort of like what does it mean to capture a moment, and what does it mean to take a moment with you forever? And so I think it does, I think it does depend on like what is happening in the filmmaking. Like I just made a short that was about my grandpa's retirement party, and in the film I think I say it's the only memory of him that I've got. And in that film specifically, it's like I do believe that that film is better than memory because I literally don't really have memories of my grandpa. It's all stories that I've been told, and I was so young that it all feels so like convoluted, but like you said, evocative. I think that like our own memories are always probably going to be like better than just like a recorded memory because we do imprint it with feelings and we do color it in different ways depending on like what was happening and how we were feeling. So it's kind of hard to say, but I think filmmaking does have the upper hand because it hangs on to it, and you can revisit it, and it's always like an interesting experience to rewatch my own films, um, because of that. Because I start to remember my films differently, and then you realize how skewed memory can actually get, and so yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to think too about that idea of revisiting the films. And it sounds like you have had this experience from what you just said. I was going to actually ask if you've ever found that in revisiting the films that it refreshes your memory and maybe, you realize I was remembering something wrong. It could be just some tiny detail, but I wasn't sure if you've ever, had your own memories corrected by revisiting one of your films. It
Yeah,
kind of sounds like you have, though, from what you said.
yeah, entirely. And part of the I think part of the joy of the like playground absurdism like features that I do is that it's almost at because I'm doing it in such a short, like usually they're all done in like a day. And it's so just like guerrilla style, just shoot for 5 minutes and that's what you get. It's always really exciting to revisit those because you forget what happened, and like just shooting it and being behind camera and like operating off of like this like performance and also off of like impulses. You kind of forget what actually happened. So every time I revisit them, it's really exciting because you sort of see different things, even if it's just like a little like hesitation in the way that I tilted the camera or something to like look at someone else, and then like I watch myself consider, and then I watch myself realize where the beat's headed, to just like the way that my friends move and operate in such charming ways, and the way that they filled the spaces that they were given. So yeah, I actually love rewatching my films because they are experiences that I have, and so they're like really cherished in that way. And I mean, I think that's like a huge reason why I'm a filmmaker, is just to like capture these things for myself so that I have uh, so much content when I'm older and I need the refresher. Um,
Yeah, they really are like time capsules, aren't they, to look back on little, yeah, it's just something, whether you want to call them time capsules or little snapshots or whatever. Yeah, I think they definitely have that effect as much. And I don't know if you find this to be the case, but I know personally, like when I look back at my old movies, I actually find myself more thinking about more like where I was in my life at that time that I made it, or thinking about like, oh, where did we go for lunch after the shoot, things like that. I actually
Yeah.
find that almost more interesting in some ways now.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I share that with you for sure because it's like so beautiful, right? To just like have that refresher um in the same way that, I know I hear about like families who like every Christmas they would watch their home videos in like the 80s and 90s, and even before that you would have the slide projector where you just go through and click through all of your slides and everything. And I think it's kind of, for me, it's sort of that experience, which I think sounds like it is for you too, where it just keeps your past alive in like a healthy way
Yeah.
too,
Yeah.
where I can kind of put it all in these films, and then I don't wallow, but I can still revisit and it's like it's interesting to see the things that I decided to grab onto and hang on to for my films, and compare that to like how I've let that go in different ways. Like now I don't really operate out of like frustration or spite like I
Right,
did
right.
like I did with like the first film. It was like the first film that happened, and then I just like had so much fun doing it that I never wanted to stop.
That's good to hear. I mean, for sure. I think a good friend of mine says this all the time with creative projects that, his philosophy, and I'm inclined to agree at this point in my life, is if you're not having fun with it, uh, there's no real reason to do it. I mean, it's if it's not fun, if it feels like an obligation or a
Yeah.
burden in some way, it's just, let it go, move on to something else, because yeah, and I mean, if you're not burdened by the commercial or
Yeah.
financial, practical issues of having to, I mean, if you're not relying on it for a paycheck or to pay the rent or whatever, that's a different matter. But if you're
Mhm.
doing these as passion projects, if you're not having fun with it, it's like something. It's almost like something is, trying to, you're almost trying to be told something, and you kind of have to listen and say maybe it's time to take a different direction with this or go in a different route.
Oh yeah.
I wanted to ask you about, these the digital diary films and just the idea of memory in general. I had one other question about that, which I'm curious. What do you think of the term or the label of documentary in relation to that work? I mean, do you consider them a form of documentary, or do you feel that that doesn't quite capture what you're doing with it?
No, I think that's entirely what it is. Actually, I didn't think that at first. I thought I was being clever in the way that I was doing narrative or something, and then I was talking to an old like professor mentor of mine, and uh, he was like, "These are documentaries, you know." And I was like, "Oh shit, you're right." Because especially the playground absurdism stuff, I think is quite truly documentary about my friendships and the space. They're all about the spaces I inhabit and the friendships that I have. Is pretty much what's happening in those films, and so it really is a documentary in those spaces and places and mentalities, and then and the diary film too. I think I just typically I put poetry over those and kind of alter reality a little bit, with like the post color correction and stuff, which is sometimes a little extra bonkers, but it is, yeah, it is all documentary, and I've kind of started to like accept myself as primarily a documentary filmmaker, um, in the last couple of years, and it's like it's kind of changed my whole practice in a lot of ways, which is really fun. It's fun to shift, and I've found a lot more joy in watching documentary, and especially experimental documentaries. Just like there's just like some really amazing stuff, that is chases after all the same sensibilities that I've been chasing after like my entire life, basically. And so it's fun to like find all of this stuff now. And
It's fun when you find other people who are on the same wavelength and like doing what you do, more or less in the same. I mean, not exactly, but in the general sense, doing what you're doing. You know, like if you get interested in the idea of experimental documentary and you find somebody who's doing it in a similar way, or at least has similar approaches, similar maybe similar reasons for doing it. It's fun to discover that, I think. It kind of makes you feel like, you know, um, maybe it makes you feel like you're really onto something with this approach that you're taking. It's and it's also fun just to compare, not in a sense of, better or worse, but just comparing like how different people ultimately how they express themselves. And it's nice
Yeah.
when you find people that you're kind of on that same wavelength in how you do that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I mean, especially with experimental documentary, I think it's such a pure style of filmmaking, in that it you really have to dig inside of yourself to make it happen, or dig inside of like whatever it is that you're chasing after, and really have like an appreciation for it. I think as like a general, feels like a general rule, and you also like you get lost in the world in different ways, and so you're just like chasing after that. And I think it's really fun. I was just talking to a filmmaker friend of mine, and she has a similar process to her stuff, where she just kind of like shoots and then puts it together later without even knowing what the core of it is, like kind of chasing after a feeling and collecting an archive of things for a project, and then kind of seeing what happens and what the like what the string is that's tying it all together. But yeah, it's definitely fun. It's validating, and it feels nice to be walking into a world that I don't feel like an outcast in.
Oh yeah.
And it feels nice to feel like I'm very naturally a part of like this like world, as opposed to like a more narrative filmmaking and like my film school experience, where it's just like I don't really belong here. I don't know what this is, and it feels really uncomfortable. But also, it's like I'm chasing after the wrong ideals. Where it's now I've just kind of discovered what it is that I like, and what my voice is, and what my language is, and all these other people are speaking it, and so it's fun. And
Yeah, for
that's
sure. I think it sounds like it's very rewarding, and and I have to say, I mean, I'm glad to hear that you've found this kind of outlet, because like I said, I worry sometimes that a lot of, young filmmakers, aspiring filmmakers, whatever, that they hit that brick wall, and that we're describing, and at that point kind of give up. It's because it stops being fun, or like you said, they may feel like they don't really belong in that whatever that sphere of filmmaking, and the expectations maybe don't align with their own values as far as money and the financial reasons for it. So yeah, I think that's one of the reasons it's so important to just to get the awareness of experimental films, all kinds of experimental films. I mean, there's so many varieties, almost an infinite number of varieties of approaches, but just to make people aware of them, because I think once you can find, oh, hey, there's somebody else who's thinks like this, who's doing this type of thing, it really does open up a lot of doors. And I think everybody needs to have that moment where you really can, find that path that works for you and realize you're on the right one for yourself. Um, I'm curious about one other thing with it. This is probably more relevant to the digital diary films, because what you were talking about, like with the aesthetics of, and let me just make sure I get this correctly here. You say right, the analog camcorder footage specifically, and then the post processing. How important do you feel that the technology is to your filmmaking process? I mean, besides the obvious, as a recording device, but do you feel that in some ways your films are as much about the technology and the aesthetics that they produce?
um yeah, I'd say so. Because it definitely, I have like a variety of cameras that I like to have, between different like tape camcorders and digital tape camcorders, and a more modern like mirrorless type deal.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think I think ultimately I like to combine everything, because I think different things and different feelings are just expressed better, um, with different visuals. So I'd say that it's very important for me as like the aesthetic choice, but not important to me in that I ultimately don't like I'm not trying to keep up with, you know, I'm not hopping onto like 8K right now or something or whatever. I'm not keeping up with the latest stuff as much. I just sort of it's kind of fun to get like a new camera. And so like I have a GH5, and when I got that I was just sort of I felt kind of bored um by the like Canon camera that I had, and I was interested in having something that I could grow into a little bit more. And I just liked the way that the GH5 looks, and then I've eventually gotten some lenses that I like because they create a they have this like a really crisp, dreamy look to them, with some like the right filters on them. And so I kind of just like I use the same lenses with the same filters and kind of just pick and choose what looks best for like what I'm doing. And it just kind of depends on the level of detail. Like I'm shooting a project right now that has puppets, and so I like those to be a little more crisp, um, and the sets to be better. And I like that the GH5 I can have like the vlog or whatever where I have all of the access to all of the data for the color correcting and the post correction, and so I can really I can fuck with it a lot more than I can with like the analog stuff. But like the analog stuff is also interesting because it just it kind of conveys memory a little bit different, and it feels more like memory to me, obviously, because that's like how I saw memory as a kid. And um so but like the short that I'm working on right now, which is a little more involved, like kind of bounces around between a lot of different aesthetics like that, just to create this different texture, of a space. So yeah, so very important, but also not important. Kind of I like just using what I have. I'm not trying to get like the magic red dragon or whatever
Right, right.
whatever it's called. I Even though I would love to, and I'm starting to like crave, I think it'd be fun to have something like that to like just run around with and just have like one lens on and just get like these really like incredibly information deep, videos that I can like do stuff with. But yeah, I had to get into that camera. I have to like have a good reason. Um, that is like, oh, I know why I would use that now. But anyways, yeah. So
Yeah, well, I think you made a great point about it's fun to get a new camera and to kind of see what it inspires because I know again, just, thinking back to my own experience here, but I find that I will often be inspired, that a camera can inspire a whole project because
yeah.
of a
Oh
little,
yeah.
little like quirk of it or, something that it does differently. And that, for example, I have a DSLR, which I purchased a few years ago, which is a great camera. I love having the lenses and the option to do these really crisp and uh, good looking shots. But at the same time, I like using other types of I like the versatility of and the the flexibility that you get shooting with a smartphone. You can really work kind of very quickly and discreetly if you're filming out in public or whatever. And then
Mhm.
even just recently, more out of curiosity than anything, I picked up this. I'm going to hold it up here. This was a $20 camcorder that I saw for sale in a kind of a bargain store, and it definitely has its definitely has its quirks. But I was intrigued by the idea of something so cheap, so small, lightweight, just to see what ideas it might inspire. And I actually have a whole feature film that I'm kind of in the process of collecting some footage with this right now that came to mind. It has a lot of that. This is I could probably talk for a while about this, but there is a lot of interesting quirks and flaws, let's just say, with this
Oh
particular camera. But you can do some interesting things with them. I would just make people aware of them turning somebody loose with it because you might be disappointed by the footage you get if it's not for the right project. But it's like you're saying though, sometimes the if you have the project in mind, you know you really can make the camera uh, work for that project. So anyway, I yeah I have a lot of fun with cameras like that, and I think we're on the same page that I'm not interested in just having like the latest and greatest. You know that doesn't interest me.
Yeah.
But if it's something that if it's for the right project though, I mean, I'm certainly not like I said with the DSLR, I'm certainly not opposed to, you know, having that level of quality. It's just I don't like to let it, you know, block me from getting the film made, you know, if you don't have exactly the latest and greatest camera. I do think a lot of filmmakers get hung up on gear to that point where it can actually become a roadblock. But anyway, you know, to get back to your point here and to your films, that I wanted to ask, I know we're kind of coming up on an hour here, but if I can just
Oh yeah, I got flexibility. I don't know.
okay, I just want to ask you a little bit about whatever you want to share about your creative process with the Playground Absurdist films. I mean, we've talked to how you at one level view them as documentary because of I guess what you know, what they're capturing about the time that you made them and your friends and where you filmed them and that sort of thing. But I just want to see what you can share about where the ideas come from. Yeah, and also any just like practical things. I mean, I have to say before I turn it over to you, I just want to say I think it's great that you've found friends who are willing to work on these because not just to help out, which is of course much appreciated, but even more than that, that they believe in what you're doing. You know, that they're willing to take these uh, creative risks and trust your vision and go, you know, with you where you're going with it. I think that's I think that's great. Anyway, I mean, so I just want to hear a little bit about how, you know, one of these films comes to be.
Yeah, so I think so the latest one that I did that isn't out. I haven't fully put it together yet, but the well, actually I'm gonna go back. I think the sort of process started because like I said, it's I want to shoot it in like a day. And originally the first couple that we did, I was really strict where I wanted to get it all shot in a day and then or all shot, edited, and we would watch it in one day. And so it was sort of like that was kind of the fun of it, is that we would wake up in the morning, have coffee, shoot it, and then toss it together, export it, and then sit down and have some beers and watch it and laugh, and just like it was such a like fever dream of an experience in that way. um but usually it um yeah, so the process of it, the most the most recent one, I decided I wanted um I was driving around at my job. I work for a vintage place, and so we were delivering furniture to someone's house. And we just like drove past the street that was called Zarthan, and then my coworker and I just started kind of riffing about Zarthan, and just kind of going on this like absurd riff about like these aliens and whatever. And it there's just like this sort of like um spark that happens and like the silliness of an idea where it's always connected with like a genre, more or less. And so, in this, it's like all of a sudden I'm just like, oh yeah, alien movies. And but even more than alien movies, kind of like time travel and how silly time travel can be, where it's like, no, we're here and then we're here and then we're here and then but this person died, but no they didn't. But like I don't know, you never really know what's going on. So it yeah, there's sort of the spark that happens where it just feels like the silly version of a genre, and it just kind of hits the right note, where it feels kind of like a kid's version of that genre too. And I think that's sort of what inspires me with, like, I did one that was like based in like a wizard sort of world, and it's like a lot of the times I'll come up with like the title first, and that's sort of like the root of that's like the theme of it that the seed that I base everything off of. And so like Wizard on High E was the name, and it's just like that sounds so silly. And so all the choices that I was making um, was just based on that Wizard on High E and that feeling of like being kind of silly that it gave me, but kind of exciting because it evokes this like fantasy adventure. And then I sort of make a really basic outline of like the plot points that I think would be sort of like funny or charming. And then I just add like a timestamp to them. And so would usually it's trivial, so it kind of depends on like how much time I envision like everyone being able to play around in the specific scene. So some of them are just like 2 minutes, or some is 5 minutes, or whatever. And then so when we finally get around to doing that, there's a timer that we have. Like literally, we just set a timer on set, and then when it goes off, we're kind of done with the scene. More or less. I've gotten a little more loose with that as I keep going with the process, but that's kind of the basic idea of how I get to it. And then I think that just like opens up so much room for dancing around and having the behind the scenes, because I don't tell anyone much about what it is that we're doing. I'll read them the outline, and kind of a lot of the times people will be like, we don't know what the fuck this is, but let's do it. And then so the behind the scenes, like, or the behind the camera, like directing and stuff like that, comes out of that space, which I like when it naturally happens. I like when people are confused, because it's what I feel like that's when when like in my films at least, that's when everything feels the most human, is when they're like sort of trying to figure out what to do, and it just feels very real that way. So um yeah, I guess that's sort of the gist. But a lot of it is just it's a weird spark, and I just ride the wave. And I don't always like I don't really do it unless that happens. I don't like force myself to do it, but usually I feel like once a year I have like the silly idea that's going to happen that year.
Is it fair to say that improvisation plays a significant part in the shooting of these films, as far as the actors and the dialogue that they're delivering?
Yeah, it's pretty much entirely improv. There's sometimes I'll have like rules or something, or I'll have like each character will have something very specific that I want to hear them say. And I'll give them like one line, and I'll just be like, say that as many times as you remember to say it, throughout the scene. And then sometimes it's like sometimes there's like a point A to point B, or sometimes I just throw in the like, okay, and you want to get out of here now, and then we like kind of end the scene or whatever, and kind of depends, but yeah, it's pretty much all improv on all in all aspects of it too.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a really interesting process. I mean, the idea of using like a stopwatch and just and having the scenes, sketched out as far as how long how much time you want to devote to them. I had to laugh because I do the exact same thing. It's funny. I mean, that's how I sketch out these feature films. Is I'll just jot down like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and it's like, how long do I think we can go on this?
Oh yeah.
It's really interesting to hear that. I just had to mention it's like, wow, that's exactly the same. Yeah. No, that's really cool though. I think it's interesting though too, because I've never done anything as specific as like setting a stopwatch, but I think that would be a really interesting challenge, because you could see, all right, we're going to go for 5 minutes and see what happens, and when 5 minutes is up, we're done. And I think that adds to the sense of yeah, just yeah, seeing what happens, and give yourself those parameters to work in, and what you get is what you get. I mean, I think the from everything I've seen, your actors seem to be very creative, coming up with the dialogue, and getting into it's the characters or situations that they're kind of riffing on. I love the and I'm going to look at the title because I want to make sure I get the right one here. Oh yeah, it's the Wizard on High E. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's the one I was thinking of.
Yeah,
Right. I think that cast, worked really well together. Seemed like they were all having a lot of fun getting into these parts and you know kind of playing out the different scenarios. I wanted to ask you about one other because one of the things that struck me about these films is the variety of techniques that you bring into them. And I think for anybody who, hasn't seen your films yet, and of course I highly recommend that they, check these out. But this one, actually I think it was, yeah, Wizard on High. You had like stop motion even in there, right? Stop motion animation. Am I thinking of the correct film here? Because I also see there was Here Ye Consume, which
yeah.
is really interesting. I mean,
Huh.
I know we only have so much time, but I feel like each one of these there would be a whole discussion to be had about your approach. But I mean, my point just being that you bring in a lot of different techniques into these films too. So it's not strictly improv acting. It seems like I mean, I saw stop motion. There's a very visually rich, a lot of, seems like animation of
Yeah,
different kinds plays a big part in your work.
yeah, definitely. I'm trying to think of which one was stop motion. Maybe it was Wizard on High. There was a lot of I had like overlay stuff happening with the unicorn goo or whatever.
Yeah. Now that I
If
think about it, it may have even been Love and Otherwise Existing with Winnie the Pooh. Yeah, it is actually. Yeah, I'm looking at it.
oh yes,
Yes,
yes it
that's
was.
one. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it all I mean, I don't love animating, so I love like with that I just love an excuse to do it. But I also think, it's like being someone who loves movies, it's also there's something that's sort of sometimes it's like funny but also exciting about like Wizard on High E, where it's like a lot of it was like the whole anti-climax of like the wizard showing up to the dragon and then just like dying from this like really shitty animation was just like that was the whole idea in my head is just like let's just get the wizard from getting out into the world to just like somehow fighting a dragon that I animate. And yeah, and it's funny. I just think that's funny. Like the lack of sound effects was funny. But anyways, and then it kind of ranges, but I think the animation is playful too, and that it's very scribbly, and I like that it feels kind of. I try to evoke like a child's drawing when I'm doing it, but make it like if a child could animate. I sort of like approach it that way. In the Winnie the Pooh movie, it felt absolutely essential to have like some stop motion because of the tangibility and how playful the book is, and like the Winnie the Pooh book, the way they talk about things feels so tactile to me that I just like had to do something where there was toys moving, especially after there was like toys like me holding toys or throwing around that little bear toy that I had found. Um, but yeah, I just love, yeah, I love to have a thing in the movies and I love to chase after a thing. Pooh was a little different because I, I kind of approached it with the Playground Absurdist like mindset. And I kind of hung on to the playfulness, but it kind of became a little bit more of an intensive project of like talking about the idea of like that mundane queerness and kind of weaving in like thoughts and everything in between it, so I feel like it became a little bit more purposeful for the Playground Absurdist idea, but it's still, I mean, I think Playground Absurdism is more the like of creating and playing than it is what the content is all the time. um I sort of forgot what your question or comment
No,
was.
no, I was just saying, I mean, just all these different techniques that you bring in, it's an impressive array, and I think it really makes the films, you know, all the more interesting. So I'm just saying for anybody who's
Oh
seeking
yeah.
out, I think there's a lot there to enjoy and to appreciate. I want to ask you real quick, 'cause I'd heard you use this expression, or a term, anti-film,
Yeah.
and was that now? Do you see that as directly linked to Playground? I mean, what is the relationship, I guess, between Playground Absurdism and anti-film for you?
Um, I guess in my head, absurdism is just underneath the umbrella of anti-film, because it's not trying to be. I mean, especially in the context of like a Hollywood production, like it is directly sort of like stealing those ideas just to uh fuck with them a little, or just to say like it doesn't matter, like it's just fun to do this, so it doesn't matter. And um I think the anti-film idea too is kind of true throughout my movies, because I like to play with expectations a little bit, where it's like where sometimes where I feel myself fall into, it's like, oh, this is where the beat should be happening. I try to make it offbeat a little bit, whether it's with like a plot point or in editing, or sometimes I think there's just like these really quick cuts that happen. And I don't let anyone. I feel like the experience of watching the film in one way or another is like there's it's not supposed to be gripping, necessarily, in that it is entertainment. It's supposed to be it's supposed to just be time, and it's a performance. And so I think that in itself is just the rejection of um, the audience in that way. Like, not respecting your audience is very like anti Hollywood and anti filmmaking. But also it's just like I make them for myself, and I think that in itself is anti-film a bit too, and that I like doing it, and I'm not always doing it to be snarky, but a lot of the time I am also doing it to be snarky. So
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of there's something that's satisfying, let's say, when you are able to work or push back against a lot of these expectations, but in a way that is fun for you and rewarding for you. And yeah, I appreciate where you're coming from with that, kind of wanting to play around with the expectations to sort of subvert them, and I think that is something that probably separates what we're able to do now from, or at least what we're describing here. It separates from maybe some of the more, I'm gonna call it more traditional experimental film, which I think has been again traditionally more interested in formal experimentation. And I'm talking going back to kind of the when you think about the foundational works of like the American avant-garde in the 1940s and 50s, I think a lot of it was a response to formal techniques and expectations. I think what we're describing and what I sense that there is where there's a lot of fun to be had with this is to sort of push back against the commercial narrative expectations, like you said, the audience satisfaction. And many people watching this type of film probably will get frustrated because it's not delivering on those expected beats. But for the few who really do respond to it, I think they'll love it. It's that kind of thing. Yeah, I wanted to say one thing about that term anti-film, just as a kind of an aside, but when I first heard you mention that, I immediately thought of this quote that I had read in the Richard Brody book, Everything is Cinema, about Jean-Luc Godard. Is where
hmm
the source of this is talking about Godard's move into feature, his desire to make feature films, and that in the late 1950s he was frustrated, I guess, with having to make short films because, and he referred to short films as anti-cinema. That's actually why that I'm mentioning this. He used that word anti-cinema to refer to short films. And I think in his case, I kind of wish I could read the original quote in context, but what I gleaned from reading in the book here is that Godard's the reason he called it the short films anti-cinema was he felt that they were basically they existed just to serve as a entryway for directors into the established uh, French film industry at that time. So in other
hmm
words, I think it's kind of like what we're describing with this idea of the expectation of making a feature. Now, so I don't think there's like an exact
yeah.
link there, but I think it is just kind of interesting where we're still in a way we're talking about the same basic frustrations of those expectations of what you need to do to get into the industry or to make films the quote unquote right way or whatever. But it is interesting how you've taken that. I think Godard sees it as a negative. That's the impression I get from the quote. He's kind of rejecting short films, whereas I feel like when you've used this term anti-film, you're embracing it. You're embracing all these things you can do differently, and I think that really shows up in the work and adds to the sense of fun and certainly the spontaneity that comes out of it. So I know I've kept you I think past our time here, but before we sign off, is there anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't had a chance to address yet?
Yeah, well, I actually just with what you said, I thought of a part of my whole coming to like the playground absurdism as like the descriptor for this work is that when like the real formal roots of absurdism that I was sort of getting into because I felt like that was most related as far as like um different different types of philosophy and stuff is what I was getting at. The roots of absurdism are so negative and they lack hope. And that's why I wanted to put the playground in front of it because it sort of it takes the idea of absurdism and turns it into a sandbox, where it's like there's a lot of possibilities and we just have a blank canvas here and we have entire worlds that we can make, but at the end of the day, it is kind of just a box of sand. But there's a bit more hope to it when it's playful. And so what you were saying, where you're like, I think, for Godard, it was a more negative thing. I just thought of that too, because I think it is interesting. I am a bit of an optimist or a positive. I'm just a bit of a positive person and I try to have fun. In the way that I'm approaching things. And so, I think at a certain point I did just learn to love that I love cinema, but also embrace that I am not that kind of filmmaker. But yeah, so I just want to mention that because I do think it's important. And for anyone listening to, I think it's Playground Absurdism is like rooted in the accessibility of making film and just like getting out and shooting anything and putting it together because that is filmmaking and you just figure it out and you capture your own memories and you have your own things to look back on and that's really all that matters. But yeah,
Yeah, it's a
thanks.
great reminder. Anything can be a movie. If you envision it, if you see it, and go out and do it,
Yeah,
get it up there on the screen. And
yeah,
you've certainly done it. And I enjoyed, enjoyed it a lot seeing your work, and I look forward to watching more of it. Is there any? Well, you've mentioned that you have a project you're currently working on. Is there anything that you would like to, yeah, any either other projects or websites or anything you'd like to plug where people can find your work?
yeah, I loosely update my website pretty much whenever I'm working on applications. And so there's sort of a curated selection there because my Vimeo page is a bit overwhelming, and that's waltersmits.com. But I'm Walter Smits on Vimeo, and I'm posting pretty much every like I don't try too hard to like curate my Vimeo, so I just post everything that I feel like is finished. And then my Instagram is Kooky Lemur. That's where I post a lot of like updates on my projects and stuff. And yeah, so that's where to check it out. I have this project coming out with puppets and talks about masculinity in the context or my sexuality kind of in the context of masculinity and internalized homophobia through the lens of two puppets stranded on a like jungle island. And it's sort of the surreal fantasy of realizing who I am in my gender and sexuality, and I'm excited. So keep an eye out for that.
Great. Well, thank you for all your time tonight, Walter. It was a pleasure speaking with you. Uh, Great learning more about your films and how they come to be made. And I'll just say, it was as we were saying earlier. in this discussion. It's always nice when you can meet people who, where you kind of share the same sensibilities and, uh, get inspired just by watching somebody's films. And I certainly have found that with yours. So, again, thanks for your time. Great speaking with you. And I'll make sure to link to your websites in the description of this video. Um, and I encourage everyone to please check out Walter's films. So thanks again.
Yeah, thanks so much.